We would actually go about it very different ways because our personalities are very different. You could like...
Well, our backhands are bad in different ways too.
Right, but I'm saying like if we were just working on the technical aspect
Didn't mean
of
to say
things,
your backhand is bad, by
I
the way.
appreciate that. Yeah, thanks. I threw that
to the side. Welcome to Shankcast episode number 11.
11.
Yeah, we're in double digits now.
That's kind of crazy.
Congratulations, guys.
Sweet.
Good job, guys.
On our way to triple digits. By the way, Shankcast now is on Apple Podcasts. It's on Google Play Music. It's on Stitcher. It's on Spotify. It's on YouTube. We're a little bit behind on the YouTube channel, but we'll get caught up and we'll get into a rhythm there sometime soon. But thank you all so much for helping us kick this off. We're enjoying it a lot. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that was brought to us by one of our digital students. We're going to be talking about the kind of the contrast or the stretch between winning matches versus working on technique. And I'm just going to go ahead and read the question here as it was presented to us. We need to come up with a name for this person because we don't have their permission to, we're not going to give you their credit card number and address and all that stuff and name. So we'll call this person Susan.
Ooh, I was going with Sue, so we're on the same page.
Nice. All right. So Susan wrote to us and said, as a relative beginner to tennis and not having a sports background, what would you suggest prioritizing in order to improve the fastest? Currently, so many layers to this question. Currently, while my serve technique is technically wrong, I'm constantly told that it's the most powerful part of my game. I've been focusing on my forehand for months with what feels like very slow and little improvement during match play. So, Kevin, Meg, and myself, we've been on the court coaching, teaching our entire professional lives and now digitally for a while. And we've all worked with students remotely, receiving video from them, giving them feedback, giving them a process to follow. I just thought that we had a good conversation about this the other day. I thought it was good Shankcast material.
Yeah, I agree.
So for everybody watching or listening that wants to win matches and improve their game, well, we'll kind of get into the specifics, but what's your advice to this student?
We get this question like all the time too. This isn't, I think it's a very common, and even people who don't ask it, I think feel it. Like, the understanding that balance is such a hard thing for any tennis player, as well as like myself. And I feel like probably I'm speaking for you guys, but you guys too. Like you have to, Okay, sorry, go ahead. You know what I'm saying?
Go ahead. Yeah. No, I'm laughing because, it's 100% true.
Yeah.
We all have things that we love to improve about our own games. And we're on a tennis court all the time, but, not like the old days, but a couple times a week on average. And so it'd be easy for somebody on the outside to assume, just like the old days when people were like, oh, you're a tennis coach? Like you're on court, 8 hours a day?
You should have perfect everything.
Yeah, you must be hitting the ball real well right now, or like your game must be super, super solid. And it was the opposite for us. And now probably even more because when we're on the court, we're not even hitting a ball most of the time.
Even though we said we need to go back to once a week hitting balls.
What do you mean go back? When were we ever doing that?
We did for like a month. I think... do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I think the direct answer is that it's a different balance for everyone and it all depends upon your goal. Like immediate goal as well as your long-term goal, which makes this a very
And you're
loaded...
the goals girl, so...
The goals girl, I like it.
It's just it's a hard balance, I think, for everyone. I think you have to kind of go back and forth between, okay, I'm going to work on technique and try to make this better and give a little leniency when you're playing matches. And then, okay, now I'm going to focus in on strategy and match play and not work on technique. And then you give a little leniency in your technique wise. And I think if you want both to be perfect, you're searching for something that's just not
tennis nirvana
out there. Yeah, exactly. Except for on those special days where you just feel those are the greatest days ever, where everything you hit is going to go in and you just can't make an error. Like those are.
It's been a long time since I've had a special day.
I can count on
Special
probably
days
one
have been
hand.
downhill.
But I think when you were explaining like our side of things as a tennis coach, I think that's a perfect example of this and what happens for the average tennis player. Like our goal is to make content for you guys. And so since our goal is to not be great tennis players anymore as of right now, you never know what the future holds, that our game suffers. And so when we play points, I definitely don't play at the highest level that I think I should be playing at, or things don't go where I really believe that they should have gone. But if I look at the big picture, I realize, well, that hasn't been my goal for the last month. My goal has been to create content for our listeners. And if that's my goal, I can't improve my game at that same time. And so I feel like it's the same thing. And I feel like if you're going out to a match and trying to improve technique, you're focusing on the wrong thing in match play. You can't focus on yourself.
If your goal is winning the match.
If your goal, yes, that's true. If your goal is to win the match. If it's not to win the match, then don't play them. I'm like, why? I understand why you're playing the match. I guess, yeah.
To practice my forehand.
Right, yeah. Then just practice with somebody hitting partner-wise or something. But yeah, so I feel like it's all based on immediate goals and long-term goals. And I feel like it's a back and forth balance, kind of teeter-tottering between the two to be able to really keep that improvement level going up while still maintaining like league play and being able to have some social fun on the court with your doubles teams or whatever. But that's probably personality-wise too.
Yeah, I think it's personality definitely plays a big part, but I do agree with Megan. The thing that comes to mind when I hear is like the paradox of choice, in the sense that, you know, based on your goals, whenever we choose one thing, we can't choose the other thing. And so if you're choosing to improve, at some sense of like, if you had a scale of 100 and you 90% want to choose to improve, you only get 10% to work on playing, but you can't have both at the same time. So I think that's the tough part, where, you know, I have made a switch in my game, or in the past I made a switch, and I'm always tinkering around, but, you know, realizing that if I'm tinkering around with something and then I go out to a match and play with it, it's not going to be there. Like, I accept that. And so with my personality, I can do that in some sense, because I'm like, oh, whatever. I don't care if I really win this match. If it's one of those type of matches, that I'll go through that. But yeah, you have to kind of make a choice and realize the consequences of that choice, whatever they may be, if you feel comfortable with maybe losing matches, or if you don't.
Yeah, I think a critical kind of principle that we come back to all the time as coaches is that you can only, in any given moment, you can only be consciously focused on one thing at a time. Humans can't actually multitask. We can be really good at like switching and efficient at like bouncing from focus 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. But if that's how you spend your time on the court, then none of 1 through 4 are actually going to get much better, because your attention is just spread and constantly shifting from element to element. So when you lay out like the different options, it's like, okay, I can optimize in this moment to try to use what I have to win this match against this opponent. Like, that could be one focus. I could be working on improving my shot selections and my patterns and the plays that I use on the court to be more effective. That's a completely different focus point. It might seem like there's like overlap, like I'm playing a match, so I should be able to work on my patterns. But we're talking about doing something different than what you normally do, which takes all of your attention to do that new thing the way that you're trying to do it. So totally different focus. And then we're talking about like improving a serve. That would be another individual separate focus. And then we have, you know, Kevin, Megan, myself, if we're thinking about content and like, do I want to optimize for the quality of this content or for winning or for my crappy backhand or for like, there's just like on the surface, like a bunch of different things that we could potentially be focusing on. And if you don't choose one, so for Susan here, if you don't choose between trying to win that match and trying to fix your serve or trying to improve your forehand, then it's almost like you've made a choice without making one that you're not really going to be very narrowly focused on anything. And I think that kind of describes a lot of tennis players. It's like they're out there playing and they assume that, oh, as long as I play 3 times a week, then my improvement, chart is going to be up and to the right. And unfortunately, we all have limitations, like talent-wise and skill-wise. And at a certain point, you're going to plateau without some kind of very purposeful way that you go about using your time on the court. So yeah, I like the word paradox. It's like you have to make a choice at the end of the day, unless you have unlimited talent. And but Susan says that she doesn't have a sports background. So unless there's some like dormant like genetic magic in there that's just like
genetic magic
waiting to like come out, like, and it just happens to be the right skill set for tennis, there's going to be a point where it's like everything levels out, and without the right effort on the right things, then there's just not going to be automatic improvement.
The thing is too is that it might level out at 4-5 for people. It might level out at 3-0. Like you don't.
4-5 is not likely, just to be
right. I'm just saying though, but I'm saying like what it takes to get from 2-5 to 3-0 is different than 3-0 to 3-5, different from 3-5 to 4. And so I feel like
it's not linear.
Right. And so what happens is that people start at 2-5 and they're kind of like, I just need to hit a lot of balls. Well, if you go from not hitting any balls to hitting 4 times a week, you're going to get better. Like even if your technique is horrible and your strategy is horrible, your timing actually is going to get better. Yeah. So you're going to actually be able to make more balls. And so you can get up to that 3-0 level. And then once you get there, it's like, okay, now you probably got to try to work on something. And so a lot of people start to work on strategy because it's a little easier to understand, like, okay, go cross court or something like that, rather than actually changing a technique mentally, I think, for a lot of tennis players. Because changing technique sometimes means you have to go backwards before you go forwards. And that's really hard for a lot of people.
And it's repetitive and
right.
boring, I think, for a lot of players.
Right. And so then I think that that part will only get you, like, then you kind of plateau and you get to where, like, okay, you either have to make a decision to change your technique or not. I always think it's kind of like the ACTs or SATs where you have to pick the most right answer for that time. It doesn't mean it's the right answer. It just means like it's the most right, because there's so many, and it just depends upon the person.
I'm going to play devil's advocate for a little bit.
Shocker.
Imagine that. I think, I agree with the general sense of what we're saying. I think there's so many layers, like Ian's talking about when we say improvement and where that level caps out. Because just because you have technical efficiency doesn't mean you have tactical efficiency, doesn't mean you have emotional clarity to not freak out. Yeah.
That's true.
So so there's so many other layers, and that's where you get even at, and it does start to break down as you get higher and higher levels, because these higher and higher levels don't allow for you to let those inconsistencies thrive. At a 5-0, 4-5, 5-0, 5-5 level, if someone's emotionally unstable, I will find a way to pick at that. And it doesn't matter how good their technique was, it doesn't matter how good of an athlete, if they can't emotionally keep it together and I can figure out a way, you're done.
That's
same
how
thing,
the drop shot gets me.
Yeah, same thing with technique. If they have mediocre technique, and so you have these different kind of, I think, valves or levels that make up a combination of players. Even we can look at, let's say, Andy Roddick. Didn't have the most proficient backhand, but got to be number 1 in the world because he realized his strengths and he had a good combination of it. Yeah, that's still, his backhand wasn't bad, but at his level, that was the thing everybody picked on. It's like, we're going to go pick on Andy Roddick's backhand. And so I also want to give the impression or the idea that, you can still have fun and there's different ways to improve. But if you can optimize your technique, it does give you more ability or a greater range and ability to do more things. Because I've seen people out there with really janky strokes at like 4.5, 5.0 level. But with that jankiness, they were great athletes.
They made up for it in
they
other
they had
ways.
all these other things where like they just were really crafty, and it was like, oh my god, we know one of those people.
And their mental toughness is like off the charts.
It's almost like their weakness of having poor technique, they made up for it in other ways. And so it's finding, I think, also that balance of what you're looking for with the goal set. You know, if you're optimizing for playing the best tennis, improving your technique would help, but you also have to look at all those other things, because it's the combination, the blend of those things that make a great player. You know, what we look at Roger Federer is like the culmination of a lot of things coming together.
More than a lot.
But you look at the technical, the emotional, gifted physically, having the right coaches. I mean, there's so many things that had to come together to make that recipe of Roger Federer. Obviously, we would all like to be like Roger Federer. But if you're the 3.0, 3.5, whatever, until you get to probably, I would say like 4.5, 5.0, then certain things might start popping up. I've seen people that maybe only slice at 4.5, but they're so good at it and they understand the court really well. They're pretty successful. And they know how to manage other styles. Yeah, there's going to be weaknesses when you play a guy who maybe or girl hits with heavy topspin, and they're able to like identify how they can overcome that pattern. But I think it's not clear cut and dry just to say you have to stop everything to do technique to get better, because there are other ways, and I think. You have to know the mix of what's going to work best for you. Technique will provide you with more opportunities than not having technique, but it's not the end all be all.
Yeah, I think some people look at it as like, well, my technique's really good, so I should be really good.
Right.
And
that's what people are talking about when they say I lost to a worse
yeah,
player.
Exactly.
They're only taking into account that one variable.
Right, exactly. And I mean, there's been many times where I have seen many players lose to some janky Lori Lukens. We were just discussing that jankiness.
Kevin thought you were calling out.
No, we were just talking about how the term janky can get should be like a tennis term.
Lori's gonna get a kick out of it.
Yeah, I was like, okay.
Talking about janky.
I'm picturing Lori in her car like.
Yeah.
Thanks, Megan.
No, we were talking about janky.
Okay.
Anyways,
and
how
other people.
Yes, you can have someone who has just the worst technique ever, and that either mentally breaks you down, physically breaks you down. I mean, there are so many elements to being a great tennis player, and no one, I don't think, maybe Roger Federer, is really good at all elements out there. And the people who are really good at all elements out there are top 10 in the world. It's just kind of...
there's different degrees of good.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, proficient almost is what I'm saying. They excel in every category, and they've done a lot of work along the way.
I would say even at the pro level, there's huge,
That's true.
You look at the video game, the different qualities in the charts, and there's really strong speed and quickness and terrible mental. I mean, you look at Kyrgios.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I feel like it's just
wow.
But at that level, I think you find your.
I think it's the combination.
It's
not
Plus
just
it's
the
personality too.
Proficiency, but I think it's not just you have this and this and this is but everybody you're proficient. It's the combination. It's and that's why game styles are so important in as you get to that level, because they're figuring out the best combination to present the most problems to the other player. And so Roger Federer has this combination of using inside-out forehands, his serve, and different things. Roger wouldn't go with the Nadal and say, okay, well, let's just go. Well, they can't go backhand to backhand and just it'd be Nadal's forehand, but he's going to look for that combination. Just like Nadal's I'm not going to serve and volley unless I really know at this point in time this combination works. He knows how I'm going to stay back. I'm going to be physical. I'm going to hit heavy topspin. I'm going to make you work. I'm going to run down every ball. But everybody doesn't have that combination. So I think And even like it was really interesting hearing Uncle Tony in a TED Talk talking about like raw fist technique, and he was like, "Oh, whatever, you want to work on it, work on it. If you don't want to work on it, I'm not going to work on it." So, he talks about his forehand, like he had that really weird follow through. He's like, "I didn't teach him that," and so
he actually said he was just late.
Yeah, that's what he said. Like it was a combination of him hitting so many forehands late that he adapted the.
Yeah, but I think he also asked Nadal, was like, "Do you want to work on your forehand?" And he was like, Nadal's like, "I kind of like," and so it's a combination, and there's a balance of knowing and figuring out what's going to work best for you. Because I mean, some people love to go out and just play and have fun, and that's improving. But if I think it's just finding that level of or that combination of what are you looking for.
I guess I didn't realize until we started talking how much personality really it plays a role. Like I feel like if Ian and I were both working on our backhands, which I feel like is my weakness right now, and possibly I'm speaking for you, but maybe your weakness as well right now. Then
you have to be nice.
But we would actually go about it very different ways because our personalities are very different. You could
our backhands are bad in different ways too.
Right, but I'm saying if we were just working on the technical aspect.
Didn't mean
to
say your backhand is bad. By the way,
I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks. I threw that to the side. Thanks, Ian.
It's getting personal.
But I mean, I feel like personality-wise, some people can go out and you could work on. I feel like you could work on technique and you could video and you could just shadow swing till the cows come home. And I could just struggle in that aspect. I could definitely, video and see what's going on and be like, okay, this is what I'm going to try to fix and da-da. But my personality is very impatient. And so for me, working on just technical aspects of one stroke for 3 or 4 months at a time would mentally break me down. I know that about myself. And so I would have to have some social aspects okay, well, let's play some forehand wars or do something else that might not hurt my strategy, but still give me that competitive aspect that I love of the game. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
and
totally.
And so I feel like different personalities need different things. So if you want the competition, but don't want to necessarily hurt your success that you're working on technically, you can create that pressure and competition without actually playing a match as well. Or you could just say well, I'm going to run around my backhand and I'm going to hit a lot of forehands.
Ian, is that accurate? Would you shadow swing till the cows come home?
Yeah. I wish I had something fast there, but yeah. So you good analogy for a Wisconsinite. Till the cows come home. So yeah, Susan, at this point, if you're listening, I guess I would, if I was your coach, I would ask you 2 questions. What are your big picture goals? Not for next week or next season, but 10 years from now, what are your aspirations? Number 1. And then number 2, basically what Megan is describing right now. What do you enjoy most about the game? How do you like working on your game? Is it more the competition? Is it the repetition? Is it the mastery? Is it trying to master the different elements of your game? Is it drilling? Is it analysis? Is it socializing? Is it the exercise? If you were to rate all of those and put them in order, what would that listing look like? And so, depending on what your answers are to that question, I would, personally give you completely different advice. If you're at 3-0 now and your big picture goal is to be a solid 3-5 and you really hate drilling and you love the exercise and the excitement of match play, then I'd say don't change your serve. If it's already the best part of your game, Kevin was describing all the different elements that you could also be working on outside of technique. If you focus on all those other things and make them really, really solid, you could dominate it at 3-5 without messing with your serve, more than likely. If your goal is to be a 4-5 in the next 10 years, then, if your serve is, in her words, technically wrong, right, then you're going to have a really hard time in any amount of time, 20, 30, 40 years, whatever, being competitive at 4-5 with a technically wrong serve, even with all the other things, really kind of maxed out and optimized. So I think for me, those two questions are like critical. What do you enjoy? What's your big picture goal?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about a girl that I used to teach, and like at the beginning, I would always say, okay, what is your goal? Like, what are you trying to do? And there were plenty of times where the answer that I would give after hearing what their goal was, okay, we're going to make your serve the best it can possibly be with what you have right now.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that it was going to be bad. It just means it wasn't going to be great.
Not going to blow stuff up.
Right. And if they're like, no, I want, to have technically sound strokes. And I would always say, okay, it might take a few months of going backwards before you start seeing results again. And I think it's finding, if you're with a coach, it's finding a coach that will like outright kind of tell you, here's the deal. And there are plenty of people who just want to be the best with what they have. And that is not a bad thing.
And that path is completely different from the other type of player.
Right, exactly. Because then you need to focus in on like strategy and making a lot of balls and how to make more balls. Like there's just a different focus. And so, yeah, I think that it definitely, I think the goals thing is so big.
Yeah, I definitely think the goal thing is really big, as usual. I'll come from a different angle or something. I think the goal thing is really big about where you're gonna, like Ian's saying, it's like it really changes what you're gonna do. I think the other interesting part when I start hearing about the conversation, when we say technically right, it's a very big, because it depends. I mean, you can catch a coach who's maybe coached in the, I was gonna say 50s, but they'd be like, wow. They maybe coached in the 70s where it's like everything's arm and straight, and for them that's technically right. And it's just a very interesting kind of I guess mindset or frame when we say the word technically, because we're using the idea of like the current technique is right. So like what makes it right? Is it right because the ball goes over the net consistently? Is it right because it hits more spin than what it used to hit when everybody just used to hit straight out, which is interesting. I definitely prefer the current style of technique that I think we all teach and we model off of the pros because
just slap the forehand.
Yeah, just slap the forehand for Megan. When we look at like the best players now, I think that's just an interesting thing, and I think it's almost has to be defined a little bit because when we think about technique, I'd love to hear like you guys, what's your definition of technique? Does it mean I can reproduce? I'd actually love to know the actual definition of technique.
Pops at the top of my head immediately is like efficient, like biomechanically efficient. Like if you're working against your own body, if there's high levels of like tension and tightness, if one part of the body is working in this direction and another part of the body is working in another direction, then in my opinion, that's bad technique. Like style, I feel like style is completely separate from like,
that's what I feel like too.
From good mechanics.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Yeah,
I think efficiency is a great way to describe it. Like, and I think everyone's limitations are different to create that efficiency in different ways, and that's how style is evolved, like within each player.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting because it's like, again, there's this huge variation on technique, especially you go to some. I feel for if I'm putting myself in the situation of a player going out there going, I want to get better technique, and they're going from club to club, and they go from pro to pro, and it's like so and so said
their
you need
idea
to
is totally different.
It's kind of funny because I just even with a lot of our players that are working with coaches in their local clubs are like what they're like confused because they're like, what do I do? Like this person's telling me this person's telling me this person is telling me this. So I think it also speaks to how hard it is to find kind of what we all say is the correct technique for them to work on. And so, for me, I have my own idea, but it's like figure out where, again, with what your goal is with the technique, it's like how can you be, I don't know, I'm actually stumping myself here. I don't know.
You just asked such good questions.
Such good questions. But I think for the biggest, the biggest part, I think is don't get so caught up in having perfect technique, because I am totally that coach. Like, I am a perfectionist when
We
it
have to
comes.
keep an eye on you.
Yeah, they have to reel me in. Sometimes we'll get in and they're like, Kevin, it doesn't have to be. And I'm like, no. Like, if we could get that like 10 more inches.
It's so close.
Yeah, it's so close. And my brain just like goes to that. And so I know that about myself, that I have to be careful about, like, oh, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect.
But then you also have the other aspect, which is the coach that jumps around and changes different things about.
Yeah.
And has no idea what they're even like seeing or talking about.
Well, and there are good coaches, like we know high level, like junior USTA coaches that just every lesson is a different focus. And it doesn't mean that the focus isn't wrong. It just means what's the biggest focus at that time. Just, they just jump around.
Yeah.
Every week is something different. And that's hard for players too.
Yeah.
So
I guess to tie it back into the conversation is, like, as a player, you have to be aware of not only your goals, but also who's helping you implement those goals. And like, what if that's going to be your focus to technically get better? Are they implementing your lessons in a way that's actually going to help you to get better? Because I think it's so hard if you don't know. And every week the coach is having a new lesson, like Megan's talking about, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm getting better. And really, you look back a year later and you're like, why am I still the same way?
Mm-hmm. That's always, I think, the biggest thing I tell every single person that I ever worked with, like, if in 6 months you are not better, or we are not closer to the goals that you're telling me right now today, then I am not doing my job. Like, we need to get you someone else. Because if you can't look over a 6-month time frame and you've gotten better at something, whether it means like you've been focused on technique for 6 months and your technique is better, it doesn't mean that you can use it in a match play perfectly, but if your technique is not better and that's what you've been focused on for 6 months time frame, like, there's something going on. There's something wrong. Like, you need to take a detour.
I think the scary part with something you said, not with you saying it, but just with the situation of the coaching,
I see
where you're
preferences.
saying, no, it's just like you're saying, get better at something. And I think that's the toughest part for players, because they're going to a coach and they're like, okay, let's feed you like 100 balls today, 1,000 balls today. And there's like, oh, okay, you did it right. And sometimes we've got videos where I'm like listening, I'm like, oh, wow. And the player is doing or executing whatever the coach is saying, and they're figuring out how to do it in a weird way, but gets the ball to have that same result. And then they're like, oh, and that's just a tough.
Is that the goal?
I know, and that's the tough part. That's the whole crux of it. It's like when we say,
If it's moving 3-0 to 3-5, that's completely
That's
fine.
yeah,
a
and they're
great
like, okay,
goal,
I
yeah.
moved, and then that's the tough part. I think when you do make the goal and ask the question, okay, I want to get better technique, is figuring out a way to put yourself in the best situation with the best coach to help you do that in a way that's not gonna, like, a lot of those times that's what we get. We get a player who's 3-5 or 4-0, and like, I'm really good at this. My coach is, and we're like, oh God, when we show them the video and they're like, we're like, oh God, I hate to break it to you, and they're like, oh, and they see the video of the pros and how they're not efficient, and they're like, literally, that's the thing that kind of kept them from moving to the next
It's always like
level.
the forehand. My forehand's not like, I don't need any help on the forehand. Like, I'm already.
But that's
I'm
why
already good
people
there.
get stuck at that 3-5 level, I think, is because getting from 2-5 to 3-0 and 3-0 to 3-5 is a much easier process. And a lot of people can do that by just making
Just
a
hitting
lot of balls.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But actually getting up to 4-0 or 4-5 for a lot of people means that you have to have some sort of technical, like, sound efficiency. And
that means changing habits.
And that means sometimes going backwards before forwards, which a lot of people just don't want to do. And so they stay at 3-5 for 30 years, and that's okay with them.
If they're happy.
Right. But then you have the people that aren't happy but still struggle
And they're like, what the
with
hell?
the idea. Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's, again, goes to goals and stuff, but I think it's realizing that you can go out there and just make a lot of balls, and you can get better, but will you continue to get better? And I also think the other thing is like, you can work on technique and you can work on everything. I have limitations. I'm not going to go play pro. Like, everyone has limitations. Everyone's going to kind of plateau at some point. It's just, what point do you want it to be? Do you want it to be 3.5 or do you want it to be higher than that? I think is the kicker.
Something important that you're kind of basically describing, but I just want to be clear and kind of articulating it, is that just like we've been talking about players and how there's like whatever, we've probably named 7 or 8 different criteria that are necessary to be like the best player possible. And we've talked about how different players have different proficiencies and each of those different classifications of like tennis skill. And I just want to be clear to our audience that the same thing is true of coaches. I mean, we could probably break down a list of like 15 or 20 different qualities that are important in a coach. And every coach is going to have different like pros and cons and skills and things that they're just like fits because of their, we were talking about personality too. It's like because of their personality, like they love like the analytical side, but they just don't really ever talk about strategy because it's just never really been their jam or whatever, you know, whatever it is. And I think it's critical, you were talking about this, Kevin, to define your goals, number one, and then go to the trouble of finding a coach that actually exemplifies the abilities to explain and guide a player through whatever path it is that you need to achieve those goals. And not every coach will be able to do that very well. Different coaches have different
we all
strengths.
have downfalls.
And some coaches can do it even though it's not really what's going on.
What do you mean?
What do you mean?
Meaning that some coaches I've seen where they're like, yeah, that's great, and the reason that worked
they're
is
just
because
making it up.
and it's close enough, but you're like, yeah, and you're like, oh,
Cause and effect.
yeah, I know.
I know you're trying to say it.
But
That
yeah.
won't ever make its way back to anybody.
But but I think, I totally agree with you. I just think it's, looking from this angle, talking about this deeper, it is a pretty tall task on the side of a player to want to change something, create the environment and have the personality to do it, and then find someone to implement it.
It's easy for players, I think, to just assume that because they have USPTA like next to their name, that's like, they're certified. Like they've been coaching for 20 years or 30 years. Like no matter what my goal is, they must be able to.
Yeah.
Or they were an amazing player, so they must be able to.
That's a whole nother topic.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like that's another thing that people say a lot.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, that's a hard. It's a hard thing for someone to kind of put their own like self aside and want to improve without isolating themselves from others as well. I feel like in the world of tennis, like you kind of have to be okay. Like I feel like you two are totally fine with like I'll
Being
just
alone.
be by myself forever. Yeah. Kevin would sit in a room for 20 hours a day if he could. But I definitely am not. And so like when I'm in the improvement process, I know that if I were to just like isolate me and the ball machine for months on end, I would hate tennis. Like I would hate my life. I would hate I would hate the world. Like I just could not. That's not me. Yeah. And so I think that kind of figuring out that balance that works for you and understanding.
I've been drinking juice and tea all morning because I'm trying not to get sick.
Understanding that balance is super difficult. And so I feel like sometimes people that try to work on technique isolate themselves and it becomes a lot more difficult. And so they feel like, well, I can't work on technique because I want to be social. And I feel like you can do both. It just has to be a balance of the two.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think comes back to what you said earlier. Personality is key. Because I could totally geek out and I've done it before. Like geek out and like, oh, I'm gonna fix this, and I'll set up video, and I love that part of, and that's just the way my brain is like totally analytical in that sense. And you have to know your personality, because if you're not that way, like you're saying, you have to inject some sort of social aspect, but it also, I think, means that you have to maybe also slow down or kind of give way to not improving as fast if you want to improve too, because it's like they're two different goals. It's like to improve.
I don't think that's true. Sorry.
Well, here's the thing why I think they're two different goals. To improve, if we're talking about, and I think this is the tricky part, if we're talking about technical improvement, if we're just talking about technical improvement, that's your goal, and you're talking about doing technical improvement and playing at the same time, they're two different things, because in the sense of technical improvement, it means that we're trying to do something, we're trying to do our technique as efficiently as possible, and that's the goal. When we're thinking about playing a match or a social match, we're thinking about I'm competing, and so I need the ball to go in a certain direction. And that's where the conflict of like, okay.
Stop talking about Ian. He's back.
Oh yeah,
my teeth were floating.
Back teeth were floating. Have you heard that one before? But I think we're talking about how if you're trying to technically improve, and if you're also wanting to go out and be social, you have to give up on some of the technical improvement going as fast, because they're two different goals in the sense that technical improvement is you're trying to, like we were talking about, be really efficient with the swings and the movements of your body to hit the ball. Competition or social is like, I need the ball to go in certain location right now. And so there's a conflict. If you haven't mastered that, you start fudging things like, I need the ball to do this. And you've moved away from, I don't care what the ball's doing for a sense, because I need my body to be efficient. And once you can get your body efficient, then that goal is taken care of. You can go into, I need the ball to go here. I know how to be efficient hitting the ball there. And I think that's where people want to do the same thing at the same time, but their goals get mixed up, because socially it's like, okay, if I miss this, Betty's going to be really mad at me because I double faulted for the 4th time in a row. Yep. And so it's like, I need to just dink it in. And so the technical efficiency starts to lower. Doesn't mean, or you can do, and your suggestion a lot of times, it's like, hold up, your suggestion is like,
think outside the box a little bit.
No, but it's like your suggestion is, you can serve the right way in your first serve, which means that you're going to.
That's not what I was thinking.
Oh, okay. Well, the one you always recommend to people is like serve, like the technical part, work on your first serve, but on the second serve, get it in. So for me, the definition is like you're only working on your technical part of it, probably 50% of the time, not all the time. So it means the reps are going to be lower, which means you're going to have a slower path. Not that you don't improve, but the path is going to be slower compared to, hey, I'm just going to go out and work on it all the time. So it increases faster. And then now now I've secured that goal, I can go and start making more balls.
Yeah, I think there's two parts to it. Like thinking outside the box is in like, okay, if I'm working on my backhand technique, but I really feel like I need that social aspect, I could have my friend Michelle, who we used to do this, come out and we played forehand wars. And that was my competition. That was my social aspect, where I didn't even hit backhands.
Without pulling your backhand back.
Without pulling it back. Yeah, exactly. And so now, granted, it's extra time on the court, but I didn't feel like I was pushing anything backwards in my technical improvement. And so I think you kind of have to think outside the box. It's not just match play that gives you that social competitive aspect, but I also feel like there's part of me that says, okay, and I don't think anyone knows this data, but if maybe Ian does, I don't know, we'll find out. If if you just work on technique, right, and for say 6 months or whatever, and then you work on the strategy side, right, I wonder how much slower, truthfully, is it if you kind of do where you work on technique and then you work on strategy and then you work on technique and then you work on strategy? Like I said, I'm sure you don't know any data, but what the path, is it actually slower? Is it depend upon the person? Because I think sometimes
slower than what?
Slower than which one is slower in actually achieving a higher goal? Where if you
What's the goal?
I guess that's I guess that's the truth. Yeah. But I'm saying so if their goals were the same, which one do you think would be? If your goal was the same, like I'm a 3-0 and I want to be a 4-0, And I can either work on technique for 6 months and then work on strategy for 6 months, or I can work on technique for 2 months, work on strategy for 2 months, work on technique for 2 months. Like, which one would actually get you to that goal faster?
I think
I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it depends on the skill set and like the athletic and cognitive and like emotional makeup of the player. I think it could be either one. It depends on how quickly they learn physical kinesthetic, new habits biomechanically, how quickly they can process. What's been fascinating to me about remote like coaching with people on tactics is that I've found that it's just like changing like a grip on a serve. Like if somebody's used to hitting their backhand down the line in a particular like point scenario, they're going to keep doing it unless they're really focused on, no, I need to train this other like pattern. And I think some people have a little bit of more of a skill set in one direction or another. So I think it depends on the skill set of the
We should get 2 people
individual
to have
clones.
the same goal.
Yeah,
Exact same people. Do we have 2 twins that have the same DNA, same makeup? Yeah. But I think it's interesting. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. It would be a really interesting
Yeah.
data or case study or scientific,
Right.
what do they call it, trial or...
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you in the sense that personality makes a huge difference, and there's so many variables about what can happen. That working technique and this and that, there's just a lot of different combinations for different people. Like we've had students where we've worked on a certain technique for like years, and they were just whiffing balls, and then one day they made contact. And it was
Poor kid. It was this little boy, and he literally came to drills twice a week for probably close to 2 years, and he never made contact with the ball. We try I would stand in front of him and be like, okay, you can do this, you can do this. And I mean, other than us like making contact with the ball with our hand on the poor kid just could not.
And then
but finally he did it one day, and it was like the greatest skill set ever.
And then
We
we've
were
had
all
kids that literally
so
come
excited.
out, and it's like you show them one thing, and they're like, whoa, you just did that, and they're like, what?
What's next?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, and you're just like, okay, let's try this and let's try this. So yeah, I think it's a tough thing to say. But I do think, I mean, beyond technical, I mean, strategic change. Strategic change is awesome for so many players because it's a mindset change. I think sometimes can be a little bit easier than a habit. At least that I think.
But it could be like strategic change for some people, I feel like is just as hard as changing technique sometimes.
Yeah,
Like
it just depends.
mentally,
I would
like,
say
it
on
just depends.
average, I think the physical habit's a little tougher, but it can be as hard.
like some people just really like me love to hit the backhand down line, even though I know I'm gonna miss it 90% of the time. No, I feel like no joking aside, like it's hard sometimes and you have to come at it with the same idea of training. And I think a lot of people think, well, I'll just do something different in match
it's
play.
not that simple.
And then it falls back into what you normally do.
That's where resources like the singles matrix, I think, are super powerful because it's like a framework that you can each changeover go back to and say, oh, yeah, I was supposed to be doing. It's so easy as a tennis player to like 30 seconds later completely forget what it was that your plan was and just go right back to whatever bullcrap like favorite like thing you like to try that hardly ever works, but when it works, it's like, yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So being structured and disciplined about sticking with a pattern, yeah, I think it's really hard for a lot of people. And a lot of people go into tennis because they have that kind of independence, and problem solving, and they want to just kind of do what's fun sometimes.
Right. Yeah, you're like break the mold. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes being strategically high percentage is boring.
Oh, totally.
It's just as boring as working on your technique for 6 months straight. Like that's
Getting on the treadmill at the gym.
Personality.
Just pushing
exactly.
stuff.
Personality.
elliptical every day. Yeah.
All right. I feel like we've done a good job covering this. Any kind of final thoughts for Susan?
Keep grinding, Susan. We're here to help.
I think one thing is clear. There's so many. There's no simple answer to this. You have to know the player, You have to know the coach they're working with. You have to know their goals, what
social dynamic.
Yes, yeah, totally. Social dynamic. How deep their habits are right now.
Mental toughness.
There's so many different things at play. You can't just make a simple choice and be like, oh, I'll do it this way and just magically improve. So this is a conversation that I feel like everybody needs to
listen to
yeah. Who's going to pay for a tennis lesson.
And like after you listen to us talk for whatever it is, been an hour, I'm sure, then like sit down and actually think about your goals. Like right now, sit down and think about
goals, girl.
Where you want to be. Hashtag. Because without that knowledge for yourself, it's really hard to dictate what you should be actually practicing and what you should be even having conversations like should entail with your coach and your friends and your peers and everyone else on the court, as well as conversations with yourself. Without having any sense of immediate goals and, next year goals, at least, you won't have any idea of where to take the next steps.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think knowing your personality first, be aware of your personality as you're making these goals, because I think you can easily make goals for something and not take your personality into account, and you make goals that you're probably not going to succeed at because you're just not being honest with yourself about your personality. If you're not the person who's ever been like, hey, I'm going to go just jump on a treadmill every day then you're probably not going to suddenly want to probably train technique 4 days a week, because that may not be your makeup. Megan's eyes got a little bit bigger there. And so I think it's taking that look at your personality and going, okay, realistically, what have I done in the past, like with training or whatnot, and what can I do that fits in that kind of mold to pursue my goal, whatever that may be, socially or technically or a blend of both, and then start, like what Megan's saying, is write those goals down and then pursue those things. But I think if you have a mismatch between your personality and what you're trying to do, it's just going to blow up, or you're not going to enjoy the process because you're like, oh, it's just fine. Oh, I got to go work on this technique. I got to work on this technique. And so
that's Megan's brain.
Exactly. 100%.
I got to go get the ball machine again, this stupid technique. And then it's not going to be enjoyable, and you're not going to succeed because you're just like, oh, technique. I just want to go hit a forehand winner down the line. Hit a forehand winner down the line. Stupid technique. So I think that's what's really critical.
All right. Well, thanks for listening today. As always, hopefully this was insightful, entertaining, gives you some perspective to move forwards and think about your game in the right way and think about improvement in the right way, or a better way. Maybe not necessarily the right way. You gotta be careful with the whole right, wrong, statements these days. But in general. So anyway, thanks for joining us. If you have a topic, today's topic just came from one of our online students. If you're stuck in your game or you're frustrated and you have a topic that you'd like us to discuss, just send us an email to support@essentialtennis.com and we'll talk about it. So until next time, keep working hard on your game. We're proud of all of you guys, and we'll talk to you next time.
Go play some tennis. Have a nice day.